Hi, Tripp Harrison here from Twiford Funeral Home in Manteo, North Carolina on the beautiful Outer Banks. We're here with another video installment in our series, When Someone Dies. These videos are designed to help people who have lost a loved one or expect to lose a loved one in the near future to be able to navigate the process logistically. There's a lot of information out there about grieving and emotional support and whatnot, but there are some specific logistics and hoops, so to speak, to be jumped through, and we wanted to address these one at a time. Today's video is called the removal process, and what this is in our industry terms, a removal is when the funeral home takes your loved one into their care from their place of death. And this is a really first contact, so to speak, between the funeral home and the family that they're going to be serving. When a loved one passes away, the institution or the home or wherever they're located needs to have their remains taken away. So a funeral home is called to do this removal. And it varies, obviously, from case to case what funeral home procedures are and where the deceased is located, whether it's in a home or a hospital or a nursing home, what have you. So it's a little bit different each time, but we wanted to give you some scenarios so that if you're facing this, you'll kind of know what's going to happen, especially if you've not handled the loss of a loved one before. So we're going to start with probably the most common type of removal is a removal from a hospital. Every hospital is also different. Some will take the deceased from their place of passing down to the morgue in the hospital, which, despite its dreadful portrayal in movies, the morgue is just a climate-controlled room that's private, that's used to hold those who have expired until they're taken into someone's care. Some hospitals, especially those in smaller areas or rural areas, may not have a morgue, and they may leave the deceased in the place of their death in their hospital bed until the funeral home arrives to make the removal. When the removal team arrives to the hospital, they will likely get pertinent information from the hospital staff. And that information is just some basics to sort of know a little bit about the individual who they're about to pick up. The family, if they're not present at the hospital, and if they're not already in contact with the funeral home, will be contacted by the funeral home at the next available opportunity. And in many cases, we have already talked to them because they were the ones that called us to go to the hospital. But sometimes if the hospital will call themselves. If the removal is in the middle of the night, the family will be contacted usually the next day if they're not there. Sometimes in the hospital, the removal is done by only one team member because the hospital staff will assist them in transferring the body from the hospital bed onto the transport cot. There are also removals from other care facilities like nursing homes, hospice houses, rehab centers, etc. And they're like hospitals, except that most do not have a morgue, and the removal team will use extra discretion when taking the loved one into their care, so as not to disturb the family's privacy and not to alarm or make the other residents feel awkward or uncomfortable. Again, sometimes the removal is done by only one representative because there is a staff there. Removal from a private home is a different matter entirely. These are handled by two representatives. At least through Twiford Funeral Homes, we insist on having at least two people there, sometimes three. And they are handled with great discretion when arriving at the home. Removals can be simple and quick, or they can be a little bit more complicated, primarily due to the physical situation of the location of the deceased. Ingress and egress, being able to get in and out with the remains of the deceased can sometimes be a challenge. Many home transfers just involve walking in a door and going into a bedroom and coming out and going back outside. But some involve a lot more complex maneuvering. Here in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, there are a lot of homes on the beach that are stilt homes. In other words, they're built up to stay above a large surf possibility, and there are usually many stairs going up, and that can make things a little bit more complicated. Sometimes we deal with homes or mobile homes that are very small, have very limited turn ratios, and those can all complicate a removal. And we think it's fair to let families know that it may take a little longer in a situation like that to navigate that or to figure out a way to respectfully and in a dignified manner remove that loved one from their place of death. At Twiford Funeral Home, we have especially trained staff for these type of situations because they're so common here. We also have special equipment to help us up and down stairs that ordinary funeral homes may not have. And so that puts us in a position where we can handle these things in a little bit more dignified and expeditious manner. So it's just important to understand that if ingress and egress, in other words, going in and out, is difficult, it's going to take a little bit longer. We also have removals from crime scenes and accident scenes, which are obviously quite different. There's usually heightened emotions at the scene. There's a lot of personnel present from emergency services, etc. Each of these are handled on an individual basis, and every community's emergency services provider is a little different in terms of what they'll do. They may have special procedures that they do. In some cases, the funeral home removal team will come to the scene of the event after the authorities have gotten all the information they need and take the deceased body into their care right there. In other cases, the body will be taken to a local hospital or a fire station in some cases to await the approval from authorities like a coroner or a medical examiner to release the body to the funeral home team. In most of these cases, the family's not present, and the funeral home will be contacted typically by the authorities once they have informed the family of the death. Sometimes the deceased family cannot be reached, and the funeral homes are selected on a rotation basis for the removal. This does not mean that it has to be the funeral home that's used for the arrangements, but a funeral home is selected to at least take the loved one into their care until you've selected a funeral home. Some important things to know about releasing your loved one into the care of a funeral home. First thing is the removal team will ask you about any personal effects that the deceased has in their possession: jewelry, clothing, wallet in some cases, contents of pocket. The family can choose to release the effects with the removal team and pick them up at the funeral home later, and they'll be kept with that loved one until a final decision is made as to what to do with them. However, a lot of families will take all the jewelry and personal effects of the loved one from them at the time of death, and the funeral home just takes the deceased themselves into their care. Most funeral homes will request a signature from a family member or other authority, sort of witnessing whether or not the funeral home has taken or has not taken personal effects, just to keep things clear. Secondly, a good removal team from a quality funeral home will always ask any family present at the time of removal if they'd like to have a few minutes alone with the deceased. In some cases, they're very grateful for that and say, yes, I would, and we will wait respectfully outside while they say their goodbyes. In other cases, the loved one has been deceased for a little while before they called the funeral home, and they've said their goodbyes and they're ready to just move forward. And in those cases, they'll say, no, we're good, and then we'll do the removal at that time. But it's important that a funeral home give that opportunity to the family, because it's certainly an important time for them. Thirdly, the removal team will gather a little bit of information from the family or caretaker, no matter where the death occurs, just to get a head start on the paperwork that's required. Usually the best information to have ready at the time is the deceased's full name, date of birth, time of death if known. A medical professional is on the scene in some cases and may give an official pronouncement of death time, which is used on the death certificate, as well as name and contact information for the attending physician, if possible. Social Security number, if we have it. And most importantly, contact information for next of kin, all the next of kin, so they can be included on appointments or arrangements or what have you. The removal team may also suggest an appointment time for the family to come into the funeral home to discuss arrangements, no matter how simple or complex they may be. We try to get that appointment set, if possible, at the time of removal, if not soon thereafter. Some removals will have special circumstances that a great funeral home will be prepared to handle. In my years of experience, I've had situations involving removals of extremely large people or heavy individuals, as well as those who have passed away perhaps some time before they were discovered. And those are situations that are difficult, but a trained funeral home staff in these sort of more complicated removals will do that as dignified as possible and make that removal work, basically. At Twiford Funeral Homes, we believe that helping families at one of the most difficult times and emotional times possible is an honor that must be earned. The first contact point, which is when the family meets the removal team, is a critical time, and our team is trained to respect the dignity of everyone we serve, striving to be gentle and caring and extremely respectful and discreet, and treat the loved ones that we're taking from the family and treat them as though they were our own loved ones. So before you select a funeral home, if you're not in our service area, be sure that funeral home has a reputation for honoring the dignity of those whose remains are entrusted to them. That's a really important thing. So again, every funeral home is not the same, but at Twiford's, with nearly 100 years of doing this, we have certainly a great reputation for providing very dignified and caring service for our families, and we hope that you find a funeral home near you that will do the same. I do ask that you like and subscribe to our channel, as we count on that to help our channel grow. Thanks a lot for being with me. I'm Tripp Harrison, Twiford Funeral Home, Manteo, North Carolina. We'll see you next time.